They built a pond on my land while I was out of town. Not near the line, not even close. I'm talking a full 2-acre hole dug clean into property my family's held for over 60 years, and by the time I got back, it already had water in it like it had always belonged there. I remember just sitting in my truck at the top of that rise, engine still running, staring at it like maybe I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, like maybe I wasn't even on my own land anymore. But I knew exactly where I was, and that's when I realized this wasn't a mistake you shrug off. This was the kind that changes how you look at people. My name's Daniel Mercer, and the land I'm talking about sits just outside a small town called Red Hollow, down in northern Georgia. Rolling hills, mixed timber and pasture, the kind of place where your nearest neighbor's a good half-mile away, and folks still wave even if they don't know you. My granddad bought that land back in 1961, paid cash after working 2 jobs for years, and he used to say the only thing a man really owns in this world is the ground he stands on. Everything else is borrowed. When he passed it down to my dad, and then my dad to me, it came with more than just acreage. It came with stories, boundaries, responsibilities, and one of those boundaries was marked by an old stone fence that had been there longer than any of us. That fence wasn't pretty, not anymore. Stones uneven, some sunk into the earth, some leaning like tired old men, but it ran steady along the southern edge of my property, and every survey we'd ever had done confirmed it was the line, not about the line, not close to the line. There were iron pins set along it too, old and rusted, but still there, like quiet witnesses just waiting for someone to question them. Now, about 6 months before all this happened, the land just south of mine sold. Big place, old estate, hadn't been lived in for a couple years. Then one day I see a moving truck, a couple of SUVs, and not long after that, I meet the new owners, Ryan and Elise Carter. They were from Charlotte, I think, city folks, but not in a bad way, just different. Ryan had that confident kind of handshake, firm but a little too practiced, like he'd done it 1,000 times in boardrooms instead of on dirt roads. Elise was polite, quiet, smiled a lot, but didn't say much. First time we talked, I was out near the fence clearing brush, chainsaw buzzing, and Ryan rolls up in one of those side-by-sides, dust kicking up behind him. He shuts it off, steps out, introduces himself like we're already halfway to being friends. "Hey, neighbor," he says, big grin. "Just wanted to come by and say hello." I nodded, wiped the sweat off my face, told him my name, and we talked a few minutes, nothing deep. Weather, land, how long I'd been there. At one point, I remember gesturing toward that stone fence and saying, "That's the boundary right there, runs all the way through." He looked over at it, squinted a little, then nodded like it didn't matter much. "Good to know," he said. And honestly, that should have been the end of it. Just 2 neighbors, setting expectations early, no confusion, no problems. About 9 weeks later, I had to head up to Tennessee to help my younger brother move his family into a new place. Thought I'd be gone maybe 4 or 5 days. Ended up staying closer to 2 weeks because things got complicated, as they tend to do. While I was gone, I didn't think twice about my land, never had a reason to. It's quiet out there. Nothing really happens unless you make it happen. The day I got back, I dropped my bags at the house, grabbed a bottle of water, and decided to take a drive out to the back section, just to check things over, make sure nothing had fallen or flooded or gotten tangled up while I was away. It was late afternoon, sun sitting low, casting those long shadows that make everything look a little more dramatic than it really is, and I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt. Then I came over that rise. At first, I didn't process what I was seeing. My brain just stalled. There was water where there shouldn't be water, wide and still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I slowed the truck without even realizing it, rolled forward a few more feet, and then it hit me all at once. That wasn't just water, that was a pond. A big one. I parked right there and got out, boots hitting the dirt harder than I meant them to. Walked closer, step by step, like maybe it would disappear if I didn't rush it. But it didn't. The banks were freshly cut, clay packed tight. You could still see the tracks from the excavation equipment pressed into the edges. The water was already halfway up, fed by the natural spring that runs through that part of my land, my spring. I turned slowly, looking for anything that would tell me I was wrong. A marker, a flag, anything. But all I saw, just off to the side, was that old stone fence, exactly where it had always been. And that pond sat a good 40, maybe 50 yards on my side of it. I just stood there for a minute, hands on my hips, staring at something that shouldn't exist. You ever have one of those moments where you're not even angry yet, just confused in a way that feels heavier than anger? Like your brain is trying to catch up to something your eyes already know is real? That's where I was. Then the anger came. I pulled out my phone and scrolled until I found Ryan's number. We'd only texted once before, something about a shared fence repair, nothing serious. I hit call, and he picked up on the second ring. Voice light, almost cheerful. Daniel, hey man, what's going on? I didn't waste time. You built a pond, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, on my land. That needs to be filled back in. Immediately, there was a pause, just a beat too long. Then he chuckled, like I'd made some kind of joke. Oh, that pond. Yeah, that's ours. We had a contractor come out. He does this kind of work all over the county. He checked the property line before we started digging. I looked back at the fence, then out at the water, then back again. No, I said, slower this time. Your contractor checked it wrong. That pond is on my side of the boundary, and not by a little. His tone shifted, not angry yet, but defensive, like someone who doesn't like being told they messed up. Well, we paid a lot of money for that job, he said. And the guy we hired has been doing this for years. Maybe that old fence isn't where you think it is. I let out a breath, long and controlled, the kind you take when you're trying real hard not to say something you can't take back. That old fence has marked this boundary longer than either of us has been alive, I said. You need to take a real hard look at where you dug, because right now, you're sitting on my property. Another pause, shorter this time, sharper. Look, he said, voice tightening just a little. Why don't we both get our surveys and compare notes before jumping to conclusions? I glanced at the water again, the way it spread out across land that had never held it before. That's fine, I said. But I'm telling you now, that pond doesn't belong where it is. We hung up after that. No resolution, just tension hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. I stood there a while longer, listening to the quiet lapping of water against freshly cut dirt, and I remember thinking, this isn't going to end with a simple conversation. And I was right. That night, I didn't sleep much, not because I was worked up, not exactly, but because my mind kept running through the same question over and over. How does something like that even happen? How does a man look at land that isn't his, bring in heavy machinery, and carve out a whole pond like he's got every right to it? And the more I thought about it, the less it felt like a simple mistake. It started to feel like either someone didn't care enough to check, or they checked and decided it didn't matter. Next morning, I called a man named Harold Whitaker. Now, Harold isn't flashy, doesn't talk much unless he has to, but around Red Hollow, if you need a boundary settled, he's the one folks trust. He'd done a timber survey for me back in 2016, thorough as they come, the kind of guy who treats every line like it's his own land on the line. He answered on the third ring, voice calm as ever. Whitaker. Harold, it's Daniel Mercer. I've got a situation. I explained it, every detail, the pond, the location, the conversation with Ryan, and there was a silence on the other end, not confused, just processing. Then he said, don't touch anything. I'll be out there this afternoon. He showed up right when he said he would, old white truck, bed full of equipment that looked like it had been used 1,000 times and still had work left in it. We didn't waste time with small talk. I walked him straight out to the site. He stood there for a long moment, hands on his hips, scanning the fence line, then the pond, then back again. Finally, he let out a low whistle. Well, they didn't miss it by a foot or two, he muttered. That was the first moment I felt something close to relief, not because of the situation, but because I wasn't crazy. This wasn't in my head. Harold got to work, pulling up old records, referencing the deed, walking the line with that quiet precision he's known for. I followed him most of the time, asking questions I already knew the answer to, just needing to hear them said out loud. After a couple hours, he stopped near one of the old iron pins, brushed the dirt away with his boot, and tapped it with the tip of his measuring rod. This is it, he said. Same line as before. Hasn't moved, hasn't changed. He turned and pointed straight across toward the water. That pond sits a solid 40 yards onto your property. No gray area, no overlap. It's yours. I nodded, slow, letting that settle. So what happens now? He straightened up, wiped his hands on his jeans. Now we make it official. Within 2 days, Harold had pulled together a full report, historical deeds, boundary confirmations, everything documented clean and clear. He sent a formal notice to Ryan, certified, no room for interpretation. It stated the facts, laid out the evidence, and gave him 18 days to restore the land to its original condition. 18 days, that's more than fair, in my opinion. Gives a man time to admit a mistake, fix it, move on. But instead of a call, instead of even a conversation, I got a letter. Came from some law office up in Charlotte, heavy paper, formal tone, the kind that tries to sound more intimidating than it actually is. It claimed Ryan's pond was built based on professional surveying services, and that any dispute over the boundary would need to be settled through legal channels. I remember reading it twice, then setting it down on the kitchen table and just laughing. Not because it was funny, but because it told me exactly what kind of road we were heading down. They weren't going to fix this. They were going to fight it. I called Harold again, told him about the letter. He didn't sound surprised. That's fine, he said. We'll let the county take a look. Now in our area, when land gets disturbed like that, especially on that scale, there are permits, regulations, things you don't just ignore. Harold filed a land disturbance complaint with the county, attached all the documentation, and from that point on, it wasn't just neighbor versus neighbor anymore. It was on record. You'd think that might slow things down on their end. It didn't. Over the next few weeks, I watched something that, to this day, still gets under my skin when I think about it. Instead of stopping, instead of even pausing, Ryan and Elise leaned into it. They installed a fountain in the middle of that pond, one of those decorative ones that shoots water up into the air like it's some kind of centerpiece. Then came the fish, bass, bluegill, stocked right into water that didn't belong to them. And not long after that, they built a small wooden dock out over the edge. Every time I drove past that rise, it felt like they were planting a flag. Not just saying, we made a mistake, but saying this is ours now. I couldn't let that sit. So one evening, I drove down to their place, parked by the main house, and walked up to the porch. Ryan was out back when I got there, working on something near the fence line on his side. He saw me, wiped his hands, and walked over like this was just another casual neighborly chat. Daniel, he said, nodding, what's up? I didn't bother with pleasantries. You got the notice, I said. He shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. My lawyer's handling it. That notice gave you 18 days to fix what you did, I continued, keeping my voice even. Instead, you're adding to it. He glanced past me, toward the direction of the pond, then back. We're finishing what we started, he said. My attorney advised us to continue development unless there's a court order saying otherwise. I stared at him for a second, trying to decide if he really believed what he was saying or if he just didn't care. So you're willing to keep building on land that might not even be yours? He tilted his head slightly, that same practiced calm from the first day we met. We believe it is ours. There it was, not confusion, not uncertainty, belief. Or maybe just stubbornness dressed up as confidence. I took a step closer, not aggressive, just enough to make sure he understood I wasn't going anywhere. Then you better hope you're right, I said quietly, because if you're not, every dollar you put into that pond is going to cost you twice over. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The air between us felt heavy, like something just short of snapping. Then he gave a small smile. Not friendly, not anymore. We'll let the court decide. I nodded once. Yeah, I said. We will. Driving back that night, I felt something shift in me. Up until then, part of me had still been hoping this could be handled like neighbors handle things, a mistake, an apology, a fix. But that conversation made it clear this wasn't about a mistake anymore. This was about who was going to give in first. And I don't give in on land that's been in my family longer than I've been alive. The county moved slower than I would have liked. Paperwork, inspections, all of it taking time. But eventually, the case made its way to court. By then, it had been about 11 weeks since I first saw that pond. 11 weeks of watching someone else enjoy something built on my property. 11 weeks of them acting like it already belonged to them. The day of the hearing, I remember waking up before my alarm, sitting on the edge of the bed for a minute, just listening to the quiet. I wasn't nervous, not really, more focused than anything else. Because I knew what the truth was. The question was whether it would matter. The courtroom itself was smaller than you'd expect. Plain, nothing dramatic about it. Ryan and Elise were already there when I walked in, sitting with their attorney, papers spread out in front of them. Ryan glanced up when he saw me, gave a brief nod. Not friendly, Not hostile, just acknowledgement. Harold sat with me, calm as ever, a folder of documents resting on his lap like it was just another day at work. When the judge came in, everything shifted. Conversation stopped, chairs straightened, and just like that, it was real. The case moved quicker than I expected. Harold presented the surveys, the historical records, walked through the boundary line step by step, clear and precise. No emotion, just facts. Ryan's attorney argued their side, talked about professional contractors, claimed due diligence, but even from where I was sitting, I could hear the difference. One side sounded certain. The other sounded like it was hoping. Then the judge leaned forward slightly, looking over the documents one more time before speaking. And in that moment, the entire weight of the past 11 weeks came down to a few words. She didn't take long. That's the part that stuck with me the most. No dramatic pause, no back and forth like you see on TV, just a quiet review of the facts, a glance at the survey maps. And then she set the papers down and looked straight ahead like the decision had already been made the moment she saw that fence line on record. The boundary is clearly established, she said, voice steady, matter of fact, not angry, not sympathetic, just certain. The pond in question lies entirely within the plaintiff's property. And just like that, 11 weeks of tension snapped clean in half. I remember exhaling without realizing I'd been holding my breath. Not relief exactly, more like confirmation. Like the ground under my feet had finally stopped shifting. But she wasn't done. The defendants are given 22 days, she continued, to remove the pond and restore the land to its original condition. Failure to comply will authorize the plaintiff to complete the restoration and recover associated costs. That was it. No room for interpretation. No gray area. 22 days. I glanced over at Ryan. For the first time since all this started, he didn't look confident. Not shaken either. Just tight. Like someone who'd just realized a plan wasn't going to play out the way they expected. Outside the courtroom, we didn't speak. He walked one direction with his attorney. I walked the other with Harold. The air felt different, lighter in a way, but also sharper, like something unfinished was still hanging there. Clean ruling, Harold said as we stepped out into the parking lot. Yeah, I replied, looking out toward the road. Now we see if he listens. Part of me thought he would. Not because of who he was, but because of what it meant, a direct order from a judge, clear consequences, a defined timeline. Most people, when it gets that far, they cut their losses. Ryan didn't. The first week passed, nothing. No equipment, no contractors, no signs of any effort to drain or fill the pond. Week 2, same story. If anything, it looked more settled than before, like it had always been there. The fountain still ran. The dock still sat out over the water. I even saw someone down there one evening, casting a line off the edge like it was a weekend retreat. I won't lie, that got to me more than anything else. Not the legal fight, not the money, that. Watching someone enjoy something they had no right to, after being told, clearly, to undo it. Day 22 came and went. No trucks, no dirt, no change. Day 23. I didn't make a phone call. I made arrangements. There's a company out here called Iron Ridge Excavation. Been around for decades, solid reputation, the kind of folks who show up on time and do exactly what they say they're going to do. The owner, Curtis Hale, has been moving earth longer than I've been alive, quiet guy, but when he speaks, you listen. I called him a few days before the deadline, explained the situation, told him there was a chance I'd need his crew ready. He didn't ask a lot of questions, just said, "You let me know." So on the morning of day 23, I did. They rolled in just after sunrise, 2 dozers, a pair of dump trucks, and a crew that moved with the kind of efficiency you only get from years of doing the same hard work over and over. Curtis stepped out of his truck, nodded once in my direction. "We good to go?" I handed him a copy of the court order. "We're good." Harold was there too, standing off to the side with his equipment, documenting everything. Every angle, every movement. Not because we expected trouble, but because when things get this serious, you don't leave anything to chance. The first push of the dozer blade into that pond bank. I can still hear it. That deep, heavy sound of packed earth giving way, water shifting, the whole thing starting to come apart. It wasn't fast, not at first, but it was steady. Dirt moved back where it came from. The basin filled in, layer by layer. The water had nowhere to go but out, spilling off into the natural slope. draining back into the land the way it used to before any of this started. Tracks crisscrossed the site, machines working in rhythm, undoing weeks of work in a matter of hours. About halfway through the first day, Ryan and Elise showed up. Their SUV came down the path faster than I expected, dust trailing behind them. It stopped hard near the edge of the site, and Ryan stepped out, looking around like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, walking toward me. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. "You had 22 days, I said, holding up the court order. "This is day 23. He glanced at the paper, then back at the machines, then at the pond, or what was left of it. "You can't just," he started, but stopped himself, like he knew halfway through the sentence that he didn't have anything solid to stand on. "I can," I replied. "And I am." For a moment, it looked like he might argue, might try to shut it down. But then he just stood there, jaw tight, hands on his hips, watching as the dozers kept moving. Elise stayed back near the vehicle, arms crossed, not saying a word. Curtis didn't stop, didn't even slow down. He'd seen situations like this before, I think, or at least enough to know when the talking part was over. By the end of the second day, the pond was gone. Not reduced, not altered, gone. The land was graded back to its natural contour, smoothed out, shaped to match the surrounding ground like the water had never been there at all. On the third day, they finished the final touches, compacting the soil, making sure the drainage followed its original path, restoring the spring flow so it wouldn't pool again. When they were done, you could stand there and, if you didn't know what had happened, you'd never guess a 2-acre pond had existed in that spot just 72 hours earlier. Ryan and Elise came back near the end, just as Curtis was packing up. This time, there was no shouting. Ryan walked over slowly, looked out across the restored land, then at me. "You really went through with it," he said, quieter now. I handed him Harold's card along with another copy of the order. "You had your chance." He nodded once, like he understood that part at least, even if he didn't agree with it. A few weeks later, I got notice that he was trying to sue me, claiming damages for the pond, the investment, the work he'd put into it. I didn't even react when I read it. Just passed it along, let it run its course. The judge dismissed it almost immediately. Not only that, she ordered him to cover my survey costs, plus additional damages for the timber his equipment had torn up during the original excavation, a little over $9,000 when it was all said and done. That should have been the end of it. And legally it was. But things like that don't just disappear. You don't go through something like that with a neighbor and then go back to waving across the fence like nothing happened. For the next year or so, we kept our distance. No more casual conversations, no more checking in. Just two properties, side by side, with a very clear line between them, clearer than it had ever been. About 19 months later, I saw a real estate sign go up on their side. Not long after that, they were gone. New folks moved in eventually. Different kind of people, slower, quieter, the kind who ask questions before they make changes. First thing they did was walk the boundary with me, stood by that old stone fence, asked where everything ran. I told them. Same way I told Ryan the first time. Only difference was, they listened. Now here's the thing. I still think about it sometimes. Not the pond itself, not the money, not even the court case, but that moment early on, when this could have gone a completely different way. If Ryan had just walked over, knocked on my door, and said, "Hey, I think we might have made a mistake," we probably would have figured it out in a day. No lawyers, no machines, no tearing up land twice over. But he didn't, and I didn't back down. So now I'm curious, if you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have handled it the same way? Or would you have tried to settle it before it ever reached that point? Let me know in the comments. Because out here, lines on a map aren't just lines, they're everything.